We got the news last week. It broke. Scott Servais had been let go as the Mariners manager, 9 years as the Seattle Mariners manager. And I said this on MLB Tonight. I said this publicly. I'm still feeling this way. I was a little surprised by the news. I'm not saying it was a right move or the wrong move, but this time in the year, it was very interesting. Late August. There has never been a manager who's been this close in a hunt for the division, the AL West, within 5 games. Late August, literally weeks away from the end of the season, let go. Not to mention the fact that he was Jerry Dipoto's first hiring. So let's go back into it. So first of all, let's talk about managers real quick. The lifespan of a manager is roughly 3 to 4 years. Can you believe that? So Scott Servais, he went 9 years, and this is the hard truth. Whenever you have a manager take over, even Lou Piniella back in the day, I can't wait to talk to Brett Boone about Lou Piniella. You know it's going to be for a pretty short stint. But Scott Servais, man, he went 9 years. He went pretty well. He saw all of it too. Let's not forget, he went back. He was the first hire from Jerry Dipoto. They went from having the worst farm system, like I'm talking bottom 5, to the top 5 farm system after they went through that rebuild in 2028. So Scott Servais was here for the dawn of a new era in Mariners history. He really was. And you're talking about these young core of pitchers who have really carried this team, kept them within 5 games. Scott Servais was the dude in the dugout on the top step when all those guys came up, first of all, and through all those appearances and everything we've seen. Not to mention the fact that Julio Rodriguez, we saw him burst on the scene, that big extension last year. Robles just got an extension. He's seen a lot. And, he's been manager of the year a couple times, runner-up behind Kevin Cash, who, by the way, is the longest tenured manager as we speak. I think he's pushing on a decade with the Tampa Bay Rays. So, like I said, man, he's seen a lot. The big hot things that stand out for me for Scott Servais in his time here, 2021, the team didn't have really any expectations on them whatsoever. They got within a game. It came down to the last game of the season to get to the playoffs, and they won all those one-run games. You want to talk about, is it the managers, the players? What is it that gets a team over the hump? I got to say, when you're managing in that many close games, one-run games, man, that should be a feather in your cap. Then 2022, Scott Servais was there to break that 21-year playoff drought. So, man, he has seen it all. He had quite the tenure. I got to say, it was a very successful time here as the Seattle Mariners manager, but sad to see him go. But then in steps our good friend, Mariners legend, Dan Wilson, which brings us to this week's top trends. All right, so this week's top trends, we're talking about Dan Wilson, the Mariners' new manager. Let's look at some of these numbers. This is brought to you by ilovebaseball.org. Go to ilovebaseball.org. You can pay $38 a month, and you can change a young ball player's life down in the Dominican Republic. So let's take a look. First of all, 12 of his 14 years played as a Seattle Mariner. He is top 10 in Mariners history when you're talking games played, hits, RBIs, total bases, doubles, at-bats, runs scored, and not to mention he got done playing, and then he was basically a special assistant since he's been done all the way up. So the thing with Dan Wilson, first of all, I've had a chance to work with him, be around him up in the broadcast booth. We know he does color for when Mike Blowers needs to take a breather. So I've had a chance to be around him, and he's just absolute breath of fresh air to be around, man. He's always in a good mood. You can communicate with the best of them. But this is why I do like this Dan Wilson taking over. For these 3 reasons, this is what I'm going to give you. Number 1, he adds a little bit of that old school element. Now, you know me, man. I love some of the new stuff and everything when it comes to the role the managers play. We know it's a collaboration, hence the fact that only 4 managers have been fired mid-season since I want to say around 2017, because it is that, that Dipoto and the manager collaboration. But he brings that old school element to him, that Lou Piniella type element. And I'm not saying he's going to be like Lou Piniella, but let's not forget, Dan Wilson was here in the mid-90s. So he's had that kind of era, that 90s era. Then all of a sudden, the early 2000s, by the way, he was on that 95 team and that 2001 team. So he went from everything from Lou Piniella to Bob Melvin. So he's seen it all, right? And I've got to say, I'm not saying he's going to be Lou Piniella, but some of that successful managerial, how to deal with players, and it wasn't all just screaming and flipping over spread tables. When you talk, and I'll ask Brett Boone this when he comes on after the break, but when you talk to players about Lou Piniella, he had a way of communicating with his players in a certain way that Everyone respected. Mike Cameron talked about that when he was on this show. So I love that old school element, adding that to some of the resources he has when it comes to some of the analytics. I know the Mariners love to dive in. 30 teams love to dive into that. The other thing is he knows these guys already, right? If you have a new manager coming in and he's trying to get to know this system, trying to get to know these players, the way these guys tick, how they vibe in a clubhouse. Well, Dan Wilson's been down there. He's been on the field enough. By the way, when you get rid of Scott Servais, your on-field manager, you still have this young core of pitchers. I'm talking Logan Gilbert, Brian Wu, George Kirby, Bryce Miller. They're all still 3 to 5 years away from any kind of talk of free agent. Cal Raleigh, by the way, a catcher, dealt with Dan Wilson a ton, even his time in the minor leagues. So he knows these players. That's really, really important when you have this big shift, especially on-field manager. It's a big move. I've had 2 managers during my career. No, sorry, take that back. 3 managers. I had 1 manager retire one of the first days of my time in the big leagues. The next one got fired early on, John McLaren. It was Mike Hargrave, by the way. He quit. John McLaren got fired. And then Don Wakamatsu at the end of the year. But again, we're losing 100 games. A little bit different in this situation. Now, the last thing I'll say real quick before we get to Brett Boone, the communication. I got to tell you, man, I've had Kirk Gibson as a manager who's hardcore. But I could go into his office and feel really comfortable. I wasn't going to get a bunch of BS back. I was just going to get a straight shot answer. That's what Dan Wilson, when you talk to him, what you see is what you get. I'm talking about inside the clubhouse. He's not going to give you some BS or say the right things because he has that rapport with players. He had that rapport even with me. I wasn't even a player. I got a chance to hang out with him enough. I've told you that. And I'm telling you right now, that's going to be a big factor inside this clubhouse. You've got to be able to communicate. Man, there would be times I wouldn't even want to go in the office because I just didn't want to go in, hear the same BS, give me whatever I want to hear, push me out the door, because when I start to struggle, they don't have to have any accountability. I don't see Dan Wilson as having that. He's going to have that really good communication, and he knows these guys. Another guy who he knows very well is who's joining me after the break. Can't wait to have Brett Boone join me, so don't go anywhere. Keep it right here on The Top Step.